Thank you for joining us this evening for our Cumberland Family Academy workshop. Cumberland Family Academy is a Cumberland County Schools initiative. The Cumberland Family Academy is committed to enriching the lives of children by bringing parents, guardians, and schools closer together as equal partners. When families have high expectations for children and encourage them to work hard, they support and promote a child's academic, social, and emotional well-being. The purpose of the Family Academy program is to provide families with the necessary tools to support the success of their child's education. This evening, our workshop presenters are Dr. Pamela Adams Watkins, our Exceptional Children's Executive Director, and Ayanna Richards, the Director of Exceptional Children for Cumberland County Schools. Again, thank you for joining us for our Cumberland Family Academy IEP, the process for tonight. Dr. Adams Watkins, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Ms. George. And we are going to move along. I'm Dr. Pamela Adams Watkins. I'm the Executive Director for Exceptional Children. And also included on this workshop is Ms. Ayanna Richard, who will introduce herself. Oh, she says she can't unmute it this time. So
thank you. Now I can. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Ayanna Richard, and I am your EC Director for Cumberland County Schools.
All right, so tonight we want to discuss the IEP process to give you some insight into how the process works, what the purpose is, what the plan looks like, and how we attempt in Cumberland County to make the process as seamless as possible for you as you move from elementary, middle, and high, and just any of those questions that you might have about the IEP process. So before we actually get started, you can see the agenda here. We're going to do the introduction, and workshop guidelines have already been done. We're going to start with the purpose, the procedures, the plans, and then we'll have some FAQs. And then at that time, we will look at anything that's in the chat box and answer any of those questions that you may have. Again, I do want to be mindful of your time this afternoon and let you know that if it's an issue that is just general, we'll be happy to try to work with it. If it's student specific, we do ask you to send us an email so that we can investigate whatever it is that you have concerns about. So we are here to answer as many questions as possible about the process and timing. Okay. So we're going to start with Ms. Richard, who's going to talk about the purpose of an IEP.
Okay, very, very good. Well, good evening, everyone, once again. I'd like to just spend a few minutes just to give you an overview of what the purpose of IEP meetings are. And in essence, an IEP meeting is a group of individuals that come together, and we often call them stakeholders, to develop, review, and or revise an individualized educational plan, of which we tend to call IEPs. And this is only for students that have been identified through an eligibility process that we'll talk a little bit about more moving through this presentation, and they're identified as requiring a need for exceptional children's services. Now, with this group of stakeholders, there are certain individuals that have to be a part of this team that are required. And we have always an LEA representative, which stands for a local educational agency rep. You have the student of the actual disability. They are welcome to come when they're 14 and moving up. We have the parent of the student with the disability, a regular ed teacher, as well as your special education teacher. And on each one of these slides, we've kind of referenced some of the NC statutes that we utilize to talk about each one of these things. So if you need to reference that material, you'll have that ready for you. So the IEP meeting purpose. There are several IEP meetings that we can have when we sit down to the table with those stakeholders. The first and foremost meeting when we're looking at the process is a referral meeting. Now, referral is ultimately when we come together when there is a suspicion of a student with a disability that has been identified and brought to the attention of the school district. We bring a team together of those individuals that I just spoke about, and basically we determine if there are suspicions and if we want to move forward in an evaluation process to get assessments done to make that determination and then come back together as a team. Now, in these meetings, it is required at that point, if a team determines that that's what's best, that a parent gives consent and they sign off to say that we as the school district can actually assess that student in order to look at that data to make a determination moving forward. The next meeting, after that process has been completed, and we'll talk a little bit more about 90-day timelines, and because we have that period of time in order to get the evaluations done and come back to the table, we'll have what we call an initial placement meeting. And in initial placement meeting, we're ultimately going over all of those results and making a determination whether that student qualifies for the 14 disabling conditions to say that they are in need of specifically designed instruction to address any deficits that we've determined. During this meeting, we go over all of their evaluation results. That information is usually shared with parents prior to the meeting in order for them to have it. Psychologists are usually involved in this meeting because they're able to interpret the results of those assessments, as well as any related service professionals that we may have involved if speech or occupational therapy or physical therapy or nursing or any of those things are relevant. During that time frame, though, we sit and have a conversation about what that student needs, and a team comes to a decision as to whether that child qualifies for special education or they may not qualify. And basically the underlying question we need to answer is those deficits or are those issues adversely affecting that student's educational performance and them being able to progress on the standard course of study? Another meeting we have is an annual review. Once a student has been identified as special ed, every year this same team of stakeholders needs to come back together to evaluate where we are we making progress towards goals, and then we make adjustments on our present levels of performance to update any information that we may get from informal as well as formal assessments. The next meeting we may have is a 3-year rebound. And so once a student again has been identified, every 3 years, we are mandated to go back and revisit whether a student still qualifies for the disabling condition, or if there have been things that have changed, well, we need to evaluate to look at another area. That happens again, like I said, every 3 years, and we continue to monitor progress. During those meetings, we look at progress notes, we look at progress monitoring, we look at any information that we have as far as academic progress, and we make those determinations at that point. Lastly, we can do an addendum meeting, and an addendum can be called at any point in time by the parent or by the school district if there are things that come up that need to be addressed and we need to make adjustments to the IEP. I like to always say IEPs are a living, breathing document. Once it's written down doesn't mean it has to stay that way and it's not written in stone. We can consistently go back and make adjustments if needed, and those are usually called addendum meetings. So next we have the procedures of IEP meetings. And in essence, there is a timeline. When we come together to make the determination that it's time for us to have a meeting, parents get a notification and we send out an invite to a parent as well as student if it's appropriate to say, this is when we're wanting to bring this team together to have a meeting to address any of those meetings that I just listed. We'll identify that and give you an idea on that invitation, exactly what that meeting is going to encompass. We send you a procedural safeguards. There is a document, and I brought my handy dandy, so you can see that. You should get one of these every year. That will give you an outline of what your rights and what you're entitled to as far as services. A draft IEP should be sent home to you 3 to 5 days prior to that meeting if you all are going to be addressing the IEP. And then we sit down and have that meeting at that appointed time. From there, once we have the meeting during that time frame, we'll be taking information and documenting what that meeting resulted in, which will all be captured on what we call a prior written notice. And at the conclusion of the meeting, you will get copies of the actual documents that were completed, as well as a copy of that prior written notice. Dr. Adams.
So let's talk for a moment about some of the things that will occur if you suspect that there is a disability or your child is having some problems in school and you want to identify them. The first thing we want to do is make sure that when we're talking about evaluating a student or a referral, that we take the time to figure out why the student is having difficulty. So oftentimes the student support team will meet, as well as maybe the MTSS team, to determine what is causing some of the issues in class. During that time, they're going to be collecting data and information, and that can come in the form of iStation or Success Maker. But that gives them a clear picture of how your child is performing. And from that, they're going to look for any discrepancies that they see. Initial referrals are only done when we suspect there's a disability. Now, one of the things is that we have to honor an out-of-state IEP. So if a student comes in from out of state with an IEP, we will hold a comparable services plan meeting, and we'll make sure they continue to get their services. But all of their paperwork and testing has to be updated and done from the North Carolina paperwork. So what we do then is schedule a meeting to start the evaluation process. During that time, the student will receive services. However, we have to have that updated information and eligibility from Cumberland County, from North Carolina. Case teachers process all the referrals and schedule the initial IEP meetings. And case teachers are not in your schools every single day. They are assigned a series of schools. So they are the ones who do that. But as soon as you come in from out of state, we go ahead and start looking at the process. Now, also, if sometime during the meetings that you have with the school, talking about the achievement of your child, and you decide, I would just like to have my child evaluated, I suspect there's a disability, then the team will come to us and go to the IEP team for us to start that process. They will continue with their interventions because that data is important when making decisions. But the IEP team will meet to determine if we need to go ahead and start an evaluation. And we never start an evaluation without parental consent. So you have to consent to that evaluation. And that's one of the purposes of having that meeting, so that you'll know what the problems are, what we're looking at, what we're doing in the meantime, and also to give you some information about that 90-day timeline that we're going to refer to in a few minutes. All right, so there are 5 sections in the referral process. The section 1 is always to discuss what the student's strengths are. We always want to highlight for a student what is positive. You never want to go into a meeting and only look for negative. You want to find out what that student is good at, what that student is comfortable with, what that student is excelling in, because every student excels in some area or another. So we want to be able to highlight that with you as a parent. We're also seeking your input, because you would see your child from a different perspective. So we're trying to get information as to what you as a parent see as the strengths. If you know that your child is good with maps, your child is good with Legos, he may be having trouble with math, but he's great at reading, and he spends a lot of time decoding words. That's the kind of thing that we might not necessarily see as often as you do. So we want to make sure that we have an opportunity to get up to go over those strengths. We do focus also on reading, math, written language, functional skills, behavioral skills, and communication skills. And what that is with the other skills that are listed there, apart from reading, math, and written language, we want to know how your child is doing in the environment. Is he or she able to change classes, to go to different places, to transition to the cafeteria, to be able to sit in class for an amount of time, or have activities and not, have difficulty with that. So we want to make sure. Also, communication. Is your child saying, is he able to communicate with his peers, communicate within the environment, have language that helps him with his reading and math? So we look for all of that. And in preschool, it looks a little bit different. Preschool does a play-based assessment where they watch your child play and ask strategic questions so that they can get responses from your child. If your child is coloring, for instance, what color are you using? What are you doing? Are you in the lines? How is this? What is this picture? Can you explain this to me? So it's more of an assessment that focuses on just how your child is doing at that moment. The school age assessments, of course, are done by our psychologists, who will make arrangements with you to test them. We've got behavior that's done by our behavior folks, and communication skills, which is done by our speech and language. And also included in here will be if OT or PT, occupational therapy or physical therapy, is needed. And the next thing we do is we review any data that we have. We look at any local or state assessments. Again, we go back to those daily things. That's one of the purposes of iStation and Success Maker, is to give us that constant flow of information about how your child is doing. We also look back at any past testing that's been done on your student, or anything they've had. For instance, if you say, well, last year they were having difficulty in school and there were meetings, we try to find that information to find as much as we can. And again, even for that, the existing data does include the parent. If you say that my student and I, we went to Haymont, or we had to go here, we had to go there, we try to get that information so that we can use that, because one thing that you don't want to do is make decisions without all of the information. Then if we're preschool age children, we look at their early history, because sometimes medical and health information is relevant. We do a vision and hearing screening on each student that's referred. The reason for the referral is in section 3, and that's what happened, what event, what triggered this referral, that we would need to look at this and to see what's happening. So we give a detailed explanation as to why we're having the referral. And I think it's important as parents, especially if you are parents who are asking for a referral, that you be able to clearly tell the team what's going on that you see, so that we can better get that information and understand how we can assist your child. And the second part would be the IEP team determination. Okay, so at that point, we would work back from determining if there was a need, what the area was, and how we could serve the student. At the determination, we have to make a decision. So your child has been referred. We make a decision. 1, no evaluation. If we say that no evaluation is going to be done, then we have to explain to parents why we're not doing an evaluation. We have to give them an explanation that's based not on just, well, I don't think we need to evaluate, but it's based on the facts and everything that we have included. We may decide that they're eligible for special education and related services, or we may decide to conduct an initial evaluation. Those are 3 options. If selected, the IEP team has to address the assessments. We have to be specific about what assessments we're looking for. For instance, if your student has a physical disability, but everything else is great, we would not do all of the evaluations at that point. There's some things we would not do. If he or she is speaking well and they just have a physical issue, we would look at a physical disability, physical therapy. We would still do some academics just to meet those needs and make sure the child's doing well. But there's some things that we will list out what exactly those observations or evaluations will be for that student. So at that point, when we are there at that determination with that IEP team, that's when the consent for the initial evaluation will be completed. And let me clarify that the IEP team is different from some of the other teams you may meet with. You may meet with the SST team. You may meet with the MTSS team. They're all trying to find interventions to assist your student. And that data is important, it really is. But the IEP team is the only team that will make the determination whether we'll have that first initial evaluation. All right, and the participants in that, all the required participants are members and attendance for that. That's going to be your LEA rep. It's going to be your case teacher assigned to your school. It's going to be a special education teacher or regular education teacher. And then it depends on what other groups are needed in terms of the evaluation for your student. So if those groups all come together, just as stated in Ms. Richards' presentation, it is important that they are all there at the table. So the next part of this, I guess, is to just give you a little, and you can just advance the next slide, a little talk about parental consent. It's very important that every step of the IEP process be agreed to have parental consent. We can have the idea that we need to test. We can have the data that says we need to test. We can have, the IEP team asking for testing, but we cannot move forward until we get that parental consent. Because as soon as we get that parental consent, as soon as we have that meeting, we're on a 90-day timeline. And that 90-day timeline is crucial for the time that it takes from the consent to evaluate and the evaluation. And evaluation, when it involves multiple departments, for instance, if you've got to have the psychological, you've got to have OT come in and evaluate, physical therapy, speech and language, you've got to have all these moving parts. So that 90 days allows us an opportunity for these folks to do an in-depth evaluation and get the material to the teacher and the case teacher so that they can prepare for the meeting with you to make sure that you're well informed. At your meeting, that group will also make sure that you have access to all of those reports. After the initial meeting, and you've already given us consent to evaluate. We've evaluated. We have our meeting. We're here for another meeting at the eligibility meeting to make your child eligible for services and begin services. The parent then has to sign a parental consent for services. The problem is this: if you don't sign the consent for services, we cannot begin to serve your student. So we would have to wait until we actually get that paper. Get that signed. And of course, with these times that we are now with some of the virtual instruction, it's a little difficult, but we try to do it with sending it through email or through other means so that parents are not inconvenienced in terms of not having the ability to just go in and sign this paper. We even have folks that will meet you there and have you sign there, any way that it needs to be done, because parental consent for services is a vital part. If we don't get that consent, we're not allowed to work with your student. We have to have that information from you. And included in this is also information about the initial that we talked about earlier, reevaluations, the procedures, and the 90-day timeline. So let's talk for a moment about some of the things that we think might trigger a referral, especially now. Okay, and I know that a lot of parents are concerned about loss of instruction and how their students are performing. But the first thing is this: there is a difference between your student meeting the expectations that we set and your student having a serious issue that impedes them from learning. So the purpose of the referral is to figure out which one it is. And the school should be working with their MTSS teams to figure out which one it is. Is my child not doing what I want them to do because virtual learning is not something that they like and they leave and go and do something else? Or is my child just not capable of understanding at this point because there are barriers, processing barriers? You know, there are many different things that kids have trouble with. Our areas there are 14 identifying areas for EC, and that's what we try to focus on, trying to help out in those 14 areas. So one of the things that we need to be mindful of is, as parents, you do have some options in terms of working with the school to try to figure out if there is a problem that results in the need for a referral. But I would suggest that you make sure that it's not just circumstances of having been at virtual learning for this time, because there is a clear-cut difference. And that's something that's very important to differentiate with that team. So work with your principal, your assistant principal, your SST chairs, which would probably be a guidance counselor or a social worker or assistant principal, and try to figure out some troubleshooting first. Watch your child when they're doing Success Maker, watch them when they're doing iStation, watch how long when they say they're having trouble in math, if they're actually paying attention in math or if they're just doing something else, because this is a very different kind of learning for all of our kids. And we want to make sure that before we send them up for a referral, that we know this is not just a matter of he or she is not able to do their best at this time. Virtual learning has been difficult for everybody, but we just want to make sure that we don't just randomly start assigning students, that you know that there's a deficit. And of course, I do go back to the fact that some of the medical conditions that our students suffer make it necessary for them to have a referral based on just that medical condition. So there are different circumstances. And I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Richard now. She can do a few of the FAQs to sort of give you some information.
Absolutely. So these are some things that we came together to look at, that we often get questions. And one of them is, should I get a copy of the IEP before I have a meeting? If your child has already been identified and you all are coming together to meet again, the answer to that is absolutely yes. You should always get a copy of the IEP draft prior to the meeting, so that if there's anything that needs to be addressed to, specifically, you'll have an opportunity to go through it and kind of look at what the proposals are. Understand that a draft, though, is not the final version. So you can always go in and talk about some of those things that you may have concerns, and then you can share that information with your special ed teacher prior to that meeting so that they can make some of those adjustments, but then you'll have a clear-cut view of what it is you all need to discuss during that IEP meeting. Another question that we get often is, why do I need to answer questions about what my child likes? Well, one of the things that we haven't talked about is transition. And every IEP, when we talk about what we want for students, our goal is to make sure that we're writing plans that prepare them for what it is life and post-secondary outcomes what they're going to come about. So why do you have to provide those likes? Well, it gives us an idea as to how we can shape some of those things for your student to actually have, buy-in to what it is we're trying to do as far as services, as well as looking at those things that they're interested in so that we can shape those transition goals and transition plans as well. Another question we get, how often are we required to hold IEP meetings? Well, and I think that's a loaded question. Okay, so annual reviews are something that we require to hold every year, once a year. 3-year revals is something that we require to hold every 3 years. But as I said earlier, when it comes to that document, it's living and it's breathing, like it can change. And so if we need to come together to meet, then it's just a matter of somebody letting the school personnel know, and we can have an IEP meeting. So we're required to have one every year as far as IEPs, but we can have a meeting whenever it's necessary. Another question, how often should my child be reevaluated? That's one of those things where we're required again to do it every 3 years. But if there's a substantial or dramatic change in something, God forbid something were to happen and a student were to be injured and they end up with a traumatic brain injury, we may need to come back to the table to look at what might be needed prior to that 3 year. And so that's something that is always available for parents if need be, based on what the student's needs are. Another question, what are related services? Related services are those things that support students in order for them to access the academic curriculum. Speech, we mentioned earlier, is a communication disorder. And so if your student is having difficulty accessing the curriculum because of communication deficits, then that's something that speech would address. Occupational therapy is about moving and how we interact with that particular environment. When we look at nursing, if you have a student that has a medical condition where that is required, we've got students that, have feeding tubes and various things of that nature, then the team would determine that it's necessary for them to have nursing services. Transportation, are we going to be responsible for getting them back and forth to school if there are needs, like they need a special bus, if they're in a wheelchair and can't ride, a general school bus, we want to put transportation in place in order to support them so that they can get back and forth to school. If your child has a hearing impairment, it may be necessary to have, an interpreter of sorts or a sign language person. That's something that would be a related service as well. So it just depends on the student. It's all individualized, but basically related services are those things that assist in helping the student access the curriculum. Another question, can my child receive services if they're in a private school? We get that one an awful lot. And the answer to that is absolutely. There are things that we can provide through a private school service plan that we would need to look at. And generally, if there is a private school that lives in Cumberland County with us, then we as the LEA would go forward and we would look at what we needed to do to support that student. Oftentimes, speech is one of those things that we do more often when it comes to private school students, and we do provide that service if needed.
Okay, and Ms. Richard, I'm going to take this next one.
Good, okay.
Can an IEP meeting be held without a parent? We do everything in our power to make sure that parents have an opportunity to be at the IEP process. They are a vital and necessary part of that process. But if after, we've sent invitations, we send an invitation, we email, we call, and then at the end of that, because we do have a timeline, we will try a certified letter and try every effort that we have to get through to the parent to have them participate with us. The IEP team, after a certain point, has to proceed without the parent if proper notice has been given, with at least 2 to 3 meeting attempts and a certified letter. If we receive no response or a parent declines to participate, we will go ahead and hold the IEP meeting. If it's an initial meeting, we'll hold the IEP meeting, draft the IEP, but we will not move forward with services unless the parent consents to them. If a parent says, I'm not going to be able to make it, go ahead and do it and just send the information to me and I'll sign the consent. We don't like to do it that way because that doesn't give us an idea from you as to what your child's strengths are and what you're looking for and what your hopes and dreams for them are. So we would like to do that, to have those parents participate. The IEP is not a process that the school goes through for the school. The IEP process is a parent, school, student collaboration so that we're all working together for that student. And how are parents made aware of the IEP processes and regulations? Again, that's those procedural safeguards that you should get a copy of before everything starts. And there are lots of websites that give you information and additional support based on either the identification of your student or based on just general ed, EC practices in general. So there are many different ways that you'll be able to get that. And anytime that you need a copy of procedural safeguards or you want to understand child find, then you can just call the EC office and they'll be happy to give you that information. And the 90-day timeline. The 90-day timeline is a moving target. It is hoped that within 90 days, we'll have an opportunity to evaluate that student. We hope that we'll have an opportunity to do the psychological because we want to do your student justice. We want to make sure that we have evaluated them educationally, emotionally, physically, however we need to do it based on what their needs are so that we make the best decisions possible and give you the most complete information. One of the things too is a lot of parents want to know, what if I don't agree with the services? Well, there's some room for discussion in there. That's why it's a IEP. It's an IEP team decision with parental input, and everything that's discussed will be placed in that prior written notice, so that you'll have an opportunity to read back through it. Anything that you don't agree with, we will discuss. Anything that we decided was not going to be done is going to be there, because there's a section in there that says anything that, I think it says something similar to refuse any actions that the parent requested that were refused. So anything that you say in there is going to be in there. And we do try to make sure that they're thorough. We also keep minutes in Cumberland County. That's not a state requirement. That's a Cumberland County practice. So there is a person in the meeting taking minutes as well as the PWN. The state requirement is that they do the prior written notice, the PWN, because that's to house all the information. But we want to make sure that we capture everything that happens in the meeting. So we do an additional document, a local document that we have. Okay. And at this point, I know that it's a lot of information if this is something new to you. So we do have an opportunity to answer some of your questions if you have questions, and just try to give you as much information as possible so you can make the best decisions for your students. So do we have any questions in the chat box?
We do have a couple of questions, I think. Let's see. Where can we find the 14 conditions used to determine IEP eligibility?
I think that the first place to look would be on our Cumberland County site. In that, when you go to departments, you'll see exceptional children. I think the 14 are listed in there, and you'll be able to see what those conditions are. That'll give you an idea. If you need further information, I would suggest going to DPI, NCDPI, because they have in-depth definitions. We probably have just a listing and not quite in depth, so that you would get an opportunity to use their website and see what they have. But ours does contain that information. Also, if you have any concerns about something and say, I don't know which category I want to look at, I don't know what this means, I don't know if my child is here or there, then feel free to call the Exceptional Children's Office, and you'll have an opportunity to speak with someone who will go over that information with you. We have instructional specialists in each area. So each of those 14 areas almost, we have an instructional specialist who covers that. So they'll be able to give you some insight.
The next question, can parents invite other individuals to attend IEP meetings?
Yes. Yes. In a lot of our meetings, we do have other individuals. We've had everything from AU advocates to parents to grandparents, friends who understand some of the EC process. So an IEP meeting, when it's conducted, you are allowed to bring any and all supporting folks that you need to the event. We don't normally, I don't know of any meetings where we would say, no, well, they can't come. So we do try to make sure that, because again, if it's a collaboration and that person also knows the student or knows your family dynamics or wants to assist you and help you, then we want to make sure that we give them an opportunity to have that input, because you need that support as well. And like I said, it might turn out there'll be 50 people at an IEP meeting, or 25 or 7. It just depends on what you need. But please feel free to invite whoever you need to an IEP meeting.